In this video, we'll be travelling around the world to look at some of the finest street photography from some of the world's most innovative photographers from the last 100 years or so. From London to Lahore, Madrid to Moscow and Bangkok to Buenos Aires, we'll be dropping in on the world's major cities and places and their diverse cultures to explore their streets in pictures taken by some of the world's best photographers. I'll be showing only one image per photographer, and some places will naturally have more pics than others. There are pictures here you will be familiar with and those you will perhaps not have seen before, also shot by photographers that may be new to you. We'll be looking at images from the present day right back to the 1930s, and so hopefully for many of you it will be a journey of discovery as well. There'll be plenty of tips and advice along the way to help you learn from the eclectic mix of street photography that the world has to offer. Anyway, we're about to take off, so make sure that your seatbelt is fastened, your tray table is safely stowed away, and the doors are set to manual. Sit back and enjoy the journey as we begin our exploration of 50 street pictures from around the world. We're going to start here in the UK with a picture from Paul Trevor taken in 1978. His pictures are full of humour and surprise, and they captured an area of London that has since gone through dramatic social changes and development. Paris is our first continental stop, and we're transported back to the 1930s with this classic capture from Hungarian-born photographer Brassai. This moody and atmospheric scene was taken in 1933 and was part of his Paris by Night series of pictures. This is night photography par excellence, I'm sure you'll agree. In direct contrast to the noir mood of Brassai comes this charming capture by Willy Ronis of a young child running home with the morning bread under his arm. Indeed, the stick of bread is almost as long as the boy himself. The sheer joy of this moment is beautifully caught by Ronis, who I hadn't talked about before on this channel and must do so before too long. Examples of great timing in street photography are numerous, and photographers have been delivering pictures that showcase the art since the first roll of film revealed the captured image. That doesn't mean we've seen enough of them, of course, and I for one am always ready to appreciate the photographer's astute eye and quick reactions. Which brings us to Barcelona and this beauty from Pau Buscato. Colour, shape and expression combine to produce a witty and clever moment from one of the world's great cities for street photography. Rewind a few decades and we have this from another part of Spain, Madrid to be precise, and a fine example of Henri Cartier-Bresson's work from the Spanish capital in 1933. This image, as with many of his early pictures, is based on a very simple idea. In the background we have a flat plane, the wall. In the middle ground we have our important character and main point of interest. And in the foreground we have the children, or extras if you like. So it's nicely layered with the right amount of depth. The purposeful direction of the portly middle-aged man in the centre of the image is quite at odds with the excited and animated roles that the children play, who are obviously responding to Cartier-Bresson and his camera. I love this kind of juxtaposition in human behaviour. It can be used to such great effect with people in street photography. Window reflections are a wonderful source for street pictures, but this is an example where more open space in the scene is a definite case of less is more. Stuart Payton is a Scottish-born photographer living and working in Milan, and in his composition the eye is pulled about by all that there is to see. I love the fact that the reflected parts from the outside are as strongly geometric as those of the inside staircase. The solid blacks help to establish an overall frame, and the colour palette has a very modern office space feel. The silhouette of the figure descending the stairs is a striking contrast to all the surrounding geometry. It's a bit like a computer game image, but found on the street. Gianni Berengo Gardin shoots out into the mist to create some fine shapes from the silhouettes of the Tuscan monks. The mist probably conceals an otherwise intrusive background which, if visible, would change the whole mood of the picture. This is an example where the weather conditions play into our hands. Some of the best street scenes come from the bizarre juxtaposition of opposing elements, such as in this take from Otto Snoek in Rotterdam in 2007. Visual dissonance is a recurring theme in his work and often features in his approach to street photography. The countryside being transported over a pedestrian crossing in the middle of the hustle and bustle of Rotterdam city centre is the perfect example of this. Avesta in Sweden is the location for this nighttime capture from Lars Thunbjerg, and it has a little of the Edward Hopper about it, I think. It does look quite painterly in both composition and colour palette. It comes from his series called Winter, in which he explored his native land throughout the darker, colder months. Melancholic but beautiful. Julia Beyer has published books of black and white photography that feature public bathing and swimming from around the world. Her liking for elevated views often adds a surrealist mood to her pictures, as is the case here with a shot taken from diving board level from a pool in Bremen in Germany in 2002. I'm often saying that when thinking about how to photograph something, always consider and explore as many viewpoints as you can to help find the most advantageous or interesting way to capture the scene. There's always room for featuring abstract pictures in a video like this, and I have followed and admired the work of German photographer Siegfried Hansen for a while now. He has the most extraordinary eye and an impressive hit rate when it comes to delivering unusual street pictures. Much of his work is visually quite complex and often built around humorous or peculiar depictions of everyday street situations. This is a good example of the graphic connections he makes between people and random objects. Martin Kolar has brought us this terrific shot from Romania taken in 2001. Musicians in traditional dress and carrying their instruments crossing a main road to get to their next performance perhaps. It's just so bizarre to see such a group of people in a location like this. I love their casual glances into the tunnel to see if they're about to encounter a speeding car or juggernaut. The colour palette works so well too, with the red crosses complementing the red neckties of their costumes. And don't forget the street sign with the walking figure in it. A truly great street moment. In this image from Russian-born photographer Alexei Titarenko's City of Shadow series from the early 1990s, he creates great mood and uses a slow shutter speed to create a dreamlike quality, blurring the movement of people and objects in the busy streets. The effect is in keeping with the bleakness of the mood. Belgian photographer Nick Hannes has spent time travelling the world looking for human stories which have helped to shape his photographic style. This included visiting and shooting in such places as Dubai, where this image was taken in 2017. He describes the city as a market in which people are reduced to their economic value, making you feel as though you're in one big theme park. Entitled Dream Village, this shot from Manal Abu Shaheen was taken in North Lebanon in 2017. Although now living in New York, she has photographed extensively in her native country, using the theme of advertising campaigns and billboards to illustrate the extent that consumerism has changed the landscape. Morocco is a happy hunting ground for Harry Grayard, and one of my favourite of his images is this one taken in 1986. Light, colour, shape, form, this picture has it all and reminds us that once we find a potential scene, we should move around it and try all viewpoints until we hit on the one that works the best and delivers on all fronts. India is one of the most photographed countries in the world, and there is an ever-growing pool of talent there. In the shot, Raghu Rai captures this rickshaw man taking a nap while the energy and vitality of his country continues apace all around him. The use of blurred motion by adopting a slow shutter speed and his close framing and the sleeping presence of the figure accentuates this energy and reminds us of the whirl of daily life and the need to take a break. Genius. Steve McCurry's work is legendary, and the Magnum photographer has delivered so many memorable images over the years, covering war zones and places of conflict. However, this image comes from his India by Rail series and captures the most beautiful light. This next image is one of my favourites from this collection, and it's from Johannesburg, along with its creator Graham Williams, and it's part of a series he did called A City Refracted. Superb colour, and I love the subject's demeanour and shadow, which cleverly balances the image. Polly Braden is responsible for this wonderful image of an old lady with her arm in a sling and dependent on her walking stick to get about her night walk. All of this up against the blushing youth suggested by the wedding dresses in the shop window. I love this kind of juxtaposition, two sides of life brought together very cleverly through a little storytelling. Here's another scene from China taken in 2009 by photographer Carolyn Drake. This is a great example of filling the frame with content, but controlling how everything balances out with careful framing and positioning. A feeling of movement, superb colour palette, and a good focal point with the woman in the background looking into the camera. It all comes together so well and is richly rewarding to look at. This picture comes from Michael Wolff's still life images of Hong Kong, in which he shot random objects that have been left outside for occasional storage because of the cramped living conditions of many of the city's inhabitants. I love these mops standing to attention as they dry out on their brightly coloured handles. Fan Ho uses the early morning light to bathe the people on and around the steps in this shot. They are a good backdrop and give the image depth as the figures appear at various heights, adding movement. Always look for how the light affects the space it invades and how you can use it most creatively. For Japanese photographer Daido Moriyama, the emphasis is very much on the gritty and confrontational side of life in Tokyo. He shoots without looking through the viewfinder, pointing his camera in the general direction of his subject matter, thereby separating himself from the more traditional photographic, compositional and framing techniques. He's not afraid to put himself out there and shoot whatever he wants or whoever he wants. Bruno Quinquet, who is French-born but lives in Tokyo, created a body of work about the right to privacy with the series of pictures of anonymous office workers in Tokyo. It's an insightful exploration of the way in which office work affects personality and also of the issues regarding candid street photography, which can be an issue in some parts of the world. The figure in this picture looks like he's almost floating on the water with his possessions neatly arranged around him. The shadow of the photographer adds another whimsical note. Like India, you can imagine somewhere like Thailand being a rich resource for street pictures. The colour and vibrant nature of the people and the landscapes seems to almost guarantee it. Tavapong Prantumwong certainly thinks so, and his pictures most certainly provide the evidence. You have to love the creativity here in a picture entitled Ant-Man, which is part of his Good Day, Bad Day, but Everyday series from 2014. This picture was obviously taken on a good day. I love the clever use of scale and framing as the world is thrown into confusion. Australian photographer Jessie Marlowe has a terrific sense of when a great picture is about to happen. Here in Melbourne, this picture looks like it was all about getting into the right position so that the foreground and background work together. It's the sort of shot where it's so easy to get the framing wrong. I can imagine the photographer moving around quickly and trying shots in various places until he got it right. It's the thrill of the chase when you come across something so transitory like this, and you know you only have a very limited time in which to work. What satisfaction though when you nail it. I often catch myself musing about photography when I'm not actively doing it, and creative thinking doesn't have to be confined to when you're out on the street shooting. Pre-planning an idea beforehand will help you to focus your attention on what you want to achieve when you step out there. Trent Park has done that with this image taken in Sydney. He wanted to experiment with the city and show its shadow and light in new ways. The idea came to him to photograph a figure completely bleached out by the harsh light in order to change the emotional feel of a picture. Another from Sydney here, and one that I featured in my video on how to use cars in street photography that you can find on the channel. In this image, Sam Ferris uses a limited colour palette to create a semi-abstract look with the gold car nicely balancing the composition. The beautiful light gives it something of a cinematic quality. Beautiful light brings beautiful pictures. Brazilian-born Gustavo Minas has a vast body of work from around the world, including pictures from Istanbul, New York, and of course his native Brazil, which is where this particular picture was taken. Minas says that the main theme of his work is the human condition in urban spaces, something that I can definitely identify with. I love this idea of using the extreme shadow area to conceal the other participant of the handshake, and the rather quirky take on a normal everyday gesture. The street is full of such moments, but it's how we choose to record them as photographers that matters. Considered to be one of the greatest architectural photographers of the 20th century, Lucien Hervé's work is something all those who love shooting the street and the urban environment can learn from. He collaborated with the French architect Le Corbusier for over 15 years. He shot for other architects too, such as Oscar Niemeyer, as in this shot from Brazil in 1961. Graciela Magnoni is a French-Uruguayan photographer and captured these two ladies hanging out in a relaxed moment up against what looks like an old Morris Minor in Rabat in Morocco. A Tale of Two Tales, and a nice capture from Eleonore Simon from Valparaiso in Chile. She says that there is a lot of street art, colour and visual appeal to Valparaiso, but there is also something harder to describe about its atmosphere, something that resonates but is hard to put into words. Alex Webb is so good at capturing groups of people in interesting ways, and he seems to have an instinct for the right moment. There are many examples of this throughout his career, but I have chosen one taken in Mexico in 2007. There is a real story here, but it doesn't matter if we don't know what it is, because we are so drawn into this picture that the imagination will be on overtime trying to work it all out. The strange thing is, when I look at this picture, it almost feels like everything is happening in slow motion. The man trying to console the distraught woman, another woman hiding her face, and another holding a cloth to her mouth, and then the man lying motionless on the ground, almost like he is sleeping through it all. Manuel Alvarez Bravo was one of the most important figures in 20th century Latin American photography. His hallmark as a photographer was to capture images of the ordinary but in ironic or surrealistic ways. This image comes from 1942 and is one of the many he took that captured Mexico's urban life. Jeff Wall says he begins producing his pictures by not photographing. Instead, when he sees something, he thinks about it for a while and then recreates it from scratch, finding locations and using actors. For this picture, he saw something, a white man putting his eyelid back into a slant as he passes an Asian man on the street, but he didn't photograph them. Instead, he carried the moment in his head and recreated it at a later date. When I first saw this picture, I just assumed that it was a genuine street moment, that he was alert enough to capture. It never occurred to me that it was a sort of fake. It's still a great street picture, but it's a great Jeff Wall street picture. Photography is such a mysterious medium. So says Toronto-based John Leitner. It's very bizarre, it's all about discovery. And some of the more unusual street moments can be found in his work, as in this picture where parallel worlds seem to collide. I often think that Fred Herzog is one of the most overlooked photographers. He chose to shoot colour in the 1950s and 60s when most were shooting black and white. He doesn't seem to get as much love as other photographers from this period. This picture from Vancouver is a good example of his work using Kodachrome. The richly saturated colours are a hallmark of his work, and it's well worth checking out if you are not familiar with it. Ray Metzger's work has made a big impression on me. His bold black and white pictures, graphic in structure, such as this picture from 1963, is one of the many he produced in Philadelphia, a city he made his home, and its streets a frequent subject for his photography. With the emphasis on light and shade, this sublime image of a lone sailor with his kit bag slung over his arm, shot against the backdrop of City Hall in deep shadow, is typical of his work. We're in Chicago for this next picture, and it's one that I have never featured before on the channel, but it's actually one of my favourite street pictures from the American photographers who were most active in the 1950s and 60s, and who were connected with the Art Institute of Chicago. This wonderful shot is by Ken Josephson, who was a contemporary of Aaron Siskin and Harry Callahan. It's such a beautiful image that uses the light in the most creative way. Barbara Crane? Nope, until recently I hadn't heard of her either. Another contemporary of Josephson and Siskin. And this cool image comes from a Chicago-based neon series from the late 1960s. Taken in Texas in 1964, and a good example of one of the more humorous compositions from Gary Winogrand. The dark of the night helps to make the shapes stand out, and the man outside and the car look as though they are seated at the table. This is the kind of image that reminds me that we should never completely switch off and should always be alert for that unexpected picture moment. And from Houston, Texas, in 1983, a super shot from film director Wim Wenders, showing his eye for a great composition and the beauty of the passing moment. Actually, I'm going to break my one picture per photographer rule here. Let's have another from Wim Wenders. Now, it's very difficult to select just one Saul Leiter picture, but the one that I have chosen is because I think it sums up so much of what he is best known for. Not only strong colour, reflections and texture, but also fine abstract forms. He was a master at combining all the essential elements of a great street picture. This image from 1958 comes from the book Early Colour. I love this neat capture on the New York subway by French-born photographer Christopher Agu. It's the perfect street-style picture that's gone in a second. The head poking out of the carriage with the big, almost industrial-sized eye protection glasses. And then the inclusion of the beady eyes of the figure inside the carriage, looking into the camera. It's the sort of street moment that you need to be really alert to, and then some. As the sticker on the window on the extreme left states, sometimes you can't lose. Again, with Ernst Haas, there are so many of his pictures that I could have chosen, but I've gone with this image because I think it sums his genius up. The blurred colours of the moving cars play beautifully against the strong geometry of the road markings. I love using road markings in my pictures because they are great graphic elements and can be useful in creating form in your images. And here they act as anchor points as the traffic races past them, as if ignoring their directions. Although largely a black and white photographer, Louis Stettner began to experiment with colour much later in his life, and this one comes from 2006 when he was in his 80s. A strong, contrasty look with deep saturated colours. Much of his work centred around isolated figures and solitary subjects lost within the city streets. A sense of loneliness and isolation, something I have tried to convey in my own work. We're going to complete our trip by returning to the UK, and in fact to the seaside of Wales with this picture from Magnum photographer David Hearn. After all the exotic and sun-drenched locations we have visited on our journey around the world, what better way to return to reality than with this wonderful capture from 2004 from the whistling sands of Porthor on the northwest coast of Wales. And finally, arriving back from where we departed, I finish with one of my own images. I've been inspired and influenced by all of the images we have looked at today, and have learnt a great deal from them about what street photography is and what it can be. It can be anything you want it to be, dictated only by your imagination and your willingness to experiment. Please visit my website for information on my book, Fine Art Street Photography, and my one-to-one tutorial sessions. Thanks for watching.